Hello there. We are at lesson 16 in our course entitled Leadership at the Points of Contact, and we're going to have some fun today. I ordinarily don't title these lessons. I've got the sections titled, but I'm making an exception today. The title of today's lesson, I want you to listen to this, Happily Ever Afters Don't Just Happen. Now, I want you to think about that. What does that conjure up, this happily ever after notion? That's a rhetorical question, since you can't answer me, but it's fairy tales, right? The myths of childhood. And I am convinced that while we have divested ourselves of most of these childhood myths, Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy, and those of you who hadn't yet, I apologize, there's one we cling to tenaciously, and it's this notion of happily ever afters. And if you will follow along with the graphic you see on your screen, I'm going to get you to work through a model I've created to depict this myth, this barrier to success, if you will, using an experience that we've all had. So here's what I want you to do. Think back with me to your very first day on the best new job you've ever had, and then I want you to start thinking about what sort of feelings do we have, you and others, this first day on a great new job. And I'm sure that while there's a mixed bag of feelings, the dominant one for most of us is excitement. Now, here's my theory about what we use to create excitement around this new job or any other new experience. And it does go back to the conditioning influences from childhood. And the ones that stand out in my mind are the stories that we were read, which, as we can remember, no matter how old we are, all ended the same way. No matter how much difficulty the characters got into, at the end, not only did they extricate themselves from the difficult situations, how'd they live? Happily ever after. Over and over and over again, and it planted a seed. And this first day on the new job, I am convinced most people show up expecting that this is going to be a happily ever after experience for them. Now, they're not going to talk about that, but don't we see behavior this first day that indicates there's some excitement? People show up when? Early. And how are they dressed? Best credibility costume, and they smile a lot, and they work through lunch, and they stay late. They're fired up. Next question, how long does that euphoria last? And while I'm guessing it varies from person to person and situation, we can probably agree on a range, and that range is somewhere from 45 minutes to 6 weeks. And 45 minutes to 6 weeks later, again, following along with the graphic, what happens? The new wears off. And as the new wears off, so does some of the excitement. And the first line of defense may be some form of denial, trying to convince ourselves that it's not happening. But ultimately, when we realize that it is new wearing off, we get into the sequence with which we're more familiar. First stop is fear. What am I afraid of? Failure. Once again, I failed to find happily ever after. I'm afraid this is as good as it gets. Fear is not a comfortable place to be, so we get out of that quickly and get to one we're far more comfortable with, and that's anger. And the reason we're more comfortable with anger is because we can focus it out there where it belongs. Who do we blame for this unhappy turn of events? Well, since most of you are in leadership positions, I'm guessing that you know you come in for more than your share of the blame. The boss. And then there's the fellow workers. And then there's the customers. And then there's the competitors. On and on and on it goes. This blame leads almost inevitably to what I refer to as just give up. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't mean resignation. It's more like what I would call rehearsal for retirement. The people who get to just give up still show up most days, don't they? But what can we count on them to do on the days that they're there? Maybe enough to just get by. And I'm convinced that some people spend their whole careers in that unhappy state, but some take the next step and they go looking. What do they go looking for? They go looking for the next happily ever after job. And let's say they find it and they give their 2 weeks notice, and first day on the next new job, how do they feel? And it starts over again. And I'm guessing that if we think about this phenomenon, we can see it applying to more than jobs, maybe marriages, and maybe internal processes that we're using. There is a conclusion, actually a couple of conclusions that I think we can draw from this cycle. First of all, where it applies to this new and exciting happily ever after job, there's no such thing as a job that's going to make us happy. Now, I'm not suggesting there's no such thing as a job that we can be happy performing, but there's no such thing as a job that's going to make us happy. We're looking in the wrong place for something that isn't there. And finally, the second conclusion, and this is even more insidious as it pertains to organizational performance. This frantic but futile search for happily ever after processes leads us too often to abandon processes long before they could produce the results for which they were begun. It is an insidious impact of this notion of happily ever afters. So let's get to the action items for this lesson. Here's what I want you and the members of your leadership team to do. I want you to identify organizational initiatives or processes that have been begun and maybe even rolled out with great fanfare and then just seem to, die, go away. The second question for you, what impact does abandoning processes or initiatives have on staff members' willingness to commit to the ones that are rolled out in the future? As with all of the lessons in the program so far, the action items are the key to maximizing the learning. So I strongly encourage you and the members of your leadership team to work through these action items and keep one thing in mind as we move forward. This is not a happily ever after program, and this is not a happily ever after lesson in the program. But it does have the great potential for you as leaders if you work through the action items. We'll pick up there next time.